Tobacco Products and Nicotine Inhaling Products, Amendment, etc., EU Exit Regulations 2018. Lord O'Shaughnessy.
Thank you very much.
My Lords, I beg to move that the Tobacco Products and Nicotine Inhaling Products Amendment, etc., EU Exit Regulations 2018 be approved. And, my Lords, in introducing the regulations before the House today, I want to stress how critical they are in maintaining the UK's commitment to be a world leader in tobacco control as we leave the European Union. The Government strongly believes that tobacco control legislation is crucial for stopping people smoking and reducing the harms associated with smoking. Whatever the outcome of the Brexit negotiations, that belief is unwavering. Thank you. As noble Lords know, the Government is focused on the successful passage through Parliament of the deal which has now been reached with the EU. Nevertheless, we continue to plan for all scenarios, and the regulations before us have been laid for a no-deal scenario. If the UK reaches a deal with the EU, the Department will revoke or amend this instrument to reflect that deal. This instrument will ensure that the UK domestic legislation that implements the two main pieces of EU tobacco legislation, that is the Tobacco Products Directives 2014/40/EU and the Tobacco Advertising Directive 2003/33/EC, function effectively after exit day. The instrument, made under the European Withdrawal Act 2018, makes appropriate amendments and revocations to correct deficiencies in UK legislation and retained EU legislation. My Lords, regardless of one's views on Brexit, I see no reason why these amendments, the amendments we are proposing through these regulations should not be supported. The proposed amendments are critical to ensuring that there is minimum disruption to tobacco control in the event that we exit the EU without a deal in March 2019. And I would like to draw noble Lords' attention to three main changes that this instrument would introduce. First, in the event of the no deal, the UK will need to develop its own domestic notification systems for companies which wish to sell tobacco products and e-cigarettes onto the UK market. The notification process is essential for ensuring that companies are complying with legislation on product standards. Both Public Health England and the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, have commenced work to ensure that domestic notification systems are in place and functional by exit day. Second, in the event of no deal, the UK will not hold copyright for the EU library of picture warnings for tobacco products. Requiring the industry to continue to use these pictures would breach copyright law. Picture warnings are a key part of tobacco control, and it is therefore extremely important that we continue to require the inclusion of graphic picture warnings on tobacco products. Therefore, the UK has recently signed an agreement with the Australian Government to obtain the picture warnings free of cost, and I want to use this opportunity to express the Government's gratitude to the Australian Government for their assistance in this matter. I would also like to note that this approach has received endorsement from Action on Smoking and Health, which has said about our proposals on notification systems and picture warnings, and I quote, that they are pragmatic and practical, minimising the amount of additional work involved if there were to be a no-deal Brexit. We support the Government proposals for dealing with the short-term issue. Third, this instrument proposes a transfer of powers from the Commission to the Secretary of State, permitting the Government to respond to emerging threats, changing safety and quality standards, and technological advances. My Lords, in introducing this instrument, I must be clear that it will have some impact on the tobacco and e-cigarette industry. The Department ran a short technical consultation in October to seek feedback on the practical issues that will affect the industry in a no-deal situation. We received 32 responses. Tobacco control stakeholders showed support for the continued use of picture warnings and amendments to the notification system as an effective way of stopping people smoking and as a means of harm reduction. The tobacco industry did raise concerns about the timing of implementation and cost, primarily in relation to the changes to picture warnings. However, I would stress that we did not receive detailed evidence or a breakdown of costs. As noble Lords know, we have no control over timing issues, or at least this department doesn't, as the implementation timetable is dictated by the timing of EU exit. The Department of Health and Social Care has therefore consulted with external experts who have confirmed that the change and timescale is likely to be difficult but manageable. To mitigate these issues raised in the consultation by the industry, we intend to publish detailed guidance on picture warnings and the notification process in January 2019. Before closing, my Lords, I would also like to stress that the devolved administrations have provided consent for the elements of this instrument which are considered devolved. So I hope the Noble Lords can see that this instrument constitutes a necessary and important measure to ensure that our tobacco control regulations continue to work effectively after exit day in the event of a no deal. I must emphasise that due to the instrument being made under the Withdrawal Act, the scope of the amendments in this instrument is limited to achieving this objective. At an appropriate point in the future, the Department will review whether the UK's exit from the EU offers us opportunities to reappraise current regulation to ensure we continue to protect the nation's health so that the UK remains a global leader in smoking cessation and tobacco control for many years to come. I beg to move.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
My Lords, I'm very grateful to the Noble Lord and for this opportunity to just discuss e-cigarettes. It's also a great opportunity to press the Minister on the government's Brexit situation, which we haven't heard him, I think, on this matter before. But it's interesting to reflect the confidence stated in the explanatory memorandum that as a responsible government we will continue to proportionately plan for all scenarios. Well, my Lords, I think that's just as well, because I do not share his confidence that the future is at all clear, or indeed that all scenarios have been planned. But, my Lords, in relation to the statutory instrument, I'm sure it's sensible, but the explanatory memorandum does take us back to the original debate we had on this order when it came through your Lordship's House, where I think a number of us expressed concerns that the directive on which it was based is actually taking too draconian a view with regard to e-cigarettes. Now, my Lords, I happen to think that e-cigarettes are one of the most successful public health measures to help reduce smoking that we've ever seen. I think it's a great pity that some elements of the public health community who I know well and love have taken such a downer on e-cigarettes that they've encouraged a disproportionate approach to its regulation. And, my Lords, in the debate that we had, I think it was in Grand Committee, the argument was put that actually e-cigarettes should be regulated in a completely different way than to tobacco-based products. And I remain convinced that that is so. My Lords, of course we have to be very careful about potential impact on young people. I know there are those who think that the attractive advertisements or the way it's marketed can sometimes lead young people to take up smoking. My Lords, the evidence for that is very, very dubious indeed. What we do know is that e-cigarettes is attractive to people for whom most public health campaigns completely fly over. And all I do, my Lords, in this debate is to say that if, and I fervently hope we won't be exiting the EU next March, but if we do, and if the government does bring forward at some point new regulations in relation to tobacco products in general, it will take note of the debates that we've had and look at e-cigarettes probably in a completely different way.
My Lords, there are those, and I'm certainly not amongst them, who welcome the idea of Brexit because they didn't like the restrictions on the promotion of tobacco that we agreed across the EU. Contrary to the biased and very selfish claims made on behalf of the tobacco industry, these regulations have been very successful in reducing significantly the prevalence of smoking tobacco and its related diseases. We should never forget, my Lords, that tobacco products shorten the lives of half the people who smoke. So the tobacco lobbyists will be very disappointed with these regulations because they show that they have lost the arguments and there is now cross-party consensus about tackling the problems of tobacco. Even if we have disastrous no-deal Brexit that some of them want, then these regulations will, as the Noble Lord the Minister said, still allow, for example, for a set of pictures, as currently used in Australia, to continue to appear on cigarette packs in the UK, in order to warn smokers of the terrible damage done to their health by smoking. As the Noble Lord the Minister said, the regulations have the support of the excellent Action on Smoking and Health organisation, of which I'm a former director, and of course they have my own support. But I would like to use this opportunity to remind the Minister that the Tobacco and Related Product Regulations of 2016 do require the Secretary of State to review those regulations and to publish a report before May the 20th, 2021. So I think some of the important points made by the Noble Lord, Lord Hunt of King's Heath, should actually be examined when we actually make that report. There are some of us who also feel very passionately that e-cigarettes can be and must be effectively promoted as an alternative to smoking tobacco, but promoted in such a way as not to encourage those people who have never smoked tobacco to take up an addiction to nicotine. So I'd just like the Minister to confirm that, as well as he can, there will be no going back on the very successful tobacco regulation policies that we have, and which are doing so much to improve the health and the life expectancy of so many people. We should do nothing, my lords, that reverses the excellent progress that is being made on this issue.
My Lords, can I first apologise to the House for being a minute or so late? I'm afraid the business moved too quickly and the lift moved too slowly. As the Noble Lord the Minister says, the current regulations for tobacco and related products are designed to promote and protect the public's health. And as a veteran of the tobacco regulation from the last Labour government, and as the Minister who is actually responsible for the point-of-sale retail advertising regulations, which put tobacco products out of sight in our shops and supermarkets, it has to be said that all of those at the time were vigorously and energetically opposed by the Noble Lord's party, and indeed the Minister who was his predecessor but one. And it is wonderful, and I do welcome the fact that the government has definitely seen the light on this one. And I'm pleased to learn that the government's priority is to maintain the same high standards after the UK leaves the European Union, if that is indeed what happens. The Noble Lord and I are here discussing regulations are necessary if there's no deal, and I suspect they're the first of many. I think we've got a whole load of embryonic and blood things to discuss next week. And I just wonder whether that's really a very productive use of either his time or mine, actually. What these statutory instruments do is, in the event of no deal, we're obliged to introduce legislation to ensure that the policies and systems in place to regulate tobacco products and e-cigarettes will continue to function effectively and maintain the continuity with current arrangements. Now, the website and the explanatory notes use the words where possible. So I suppose my first question to the Noble Lord the Minister is to explain the words where possible. Where might we find current arrangements not being possible? If the UK leaves the European Union in March 2019 with no agreement in place, then that means, as the Noble Lord has said, that the Tobacco Products Directive and the Tobacco Advertising Directive will no longer apply directly to the UK. Ironic, since we were, of course, the pioneers in all of these matters all those years ago. And UK domestic law that implements these directives, such as the Tobacco-Related Products Regulation 2016, would of course remain in force. My understanding of the purpose of these orders is that they are threefold: a new domestic system to allow producers to notify e-cigarettes in accordance with existing rules, a new domestic system to allow producers to notify tobacco products in accordance with existing rules, and the introduction of new picture warnings, which have already been mentioned by Noble Lords, based on the picture library owned by the Australian government. I think the Noble Lord and I were both learned that the pictures that we use at the moment come from a library which is based in Brussels, and we will no longer have access to that library. Can I thank ASH for their views and their vigilance in these important matters and for their participation in the consultation process. And I agree with them that the system set out for notification of e-cigarettes and novel tobacco products in the consultation document is actually pragmatic and practical, minimises the amount of additional work involved in the notification process if there were to be a no-deal Brexit. Products notified to the UK prior to the UK leaving the European Union would not require re-notification. Data will be accepted in the same format as currently submitted, and it seems to me that those arrangements seem satisfactory. For the purposes of providing an alternative to the current picture warnings, when, in the event that the UK leaves the EU with no deal, since we will no longer have access to the rather revolting and graphic pictures, which are on the face. I've never seen any piece of legislation that actually had the pictures on the face of the bill, but this one does. So I suggest the noble lords haven't read the statutory instrument. They should at least open it and look at the pictures that it contains. And the Minister has said that we'll be switching from that set of pictures to the ones that are used in Australia, which I gather are even more horrible. However, I think I would remind the Government that in the longer term, Tobacco-Related Products Regulation 2016 require the Secretary of State to review the regulations and publish a report before the 20th of May 2021. And this review needs to examine the objectives intended to be achieved by the regulatory provision made by these regulations, assess how far they've been met, and whether they remain appropriate. So that will allow what is a quite fast-moving area of development in terms of products that are available to take place. Does the noble lord agree that that is the case? For the purposes of providing an alternative to current picture warnings, in the event the UK leaves the European Union with no deal, to switch to the pictures from Australia is of course a short-term quick fix for this emergency. However, best practice, as in the case in both Australia and in the UK at the current time, it is to rotate and regularly review and update those health warnings. Therefore, it's essential that in the longer term, the Government review the warnings, which are currently being evaluated by the Australian Government themselves, and find ways to increase the number to allow for rotation that is all currently the case. So I'd like to ask the Noble Lord the Minister, when will this happen, and what is the date that we can expect that review to take place? I think I don't need to add to the remarks made by my noble friend Lord Hunt about the importance of vaping and its place in reducing smoking. And I think these statutory instruments serve their purpose.
I'm very grateful to all noble lords who have spoken on this instrument. It's hard to believe that it's taken us this long to have our first Brexit outing on health issues. First outing of many, of course, and we may not always be in such agreement, but I'm happy that we are on this occasion, I think. To deal with the specific questions raised by noble lord, first turning to the point made initially by the noble Lord Hunt and then reinforced by the noble Lord Rennard and the noble Baroness Lady Thornton about e-cigarettes. We have obviously been working in a framework that was decided at a European level, and I think we have made the most of that framework, but it inevitably involves some restrictions which we have tried to push the boundary of in order to have, I think, what is the most rational and effective approach in Europe, and it's worked. I mean, it has contributed, as we all know, to improved smoking cessation, low use by young people, which is of course one of the fears, and we are seeing that unfortunately in the States. I think it is also worth saying that there is still some research required to understand better both the behavioural impacts of it, but also some of the health impacts from vaping products. But I have absolutely no doubt, the government has absolutely no doubt about its central role in dealing with what is still one of the biggest public health issues that we face. And so I can give the absolute reassurance that we keep an open mind as we move forward about the right way to regulate this set of products, bearing in mind the almost entirely positive benefits that they bring. It is just worth emphasising, of course, as indeed noble lords have, that the purpose of this instrument is not to change policy. It is to provide continuity and to make sure that there are fixes. But as noble lords have pointed out, as noble Lord Rennard pointed out, as did the noble Baroness Thornton, through this review of the directives, which the Secretary of State has a duty of to fulfil, we do have an opportunity to think about how they are operating in this domain and in other domains as well. Certainly we will fulfil that by 2021. Of course, it may be a decision that the Secretary of State would want to do something sooner. Of course, that's not something I can commit him to at this point in time. But, it is working. We want to make the most of it. Some of the restrictions on advertising, for example, may be stopping the full benefits of the use of e-cigarettes for smoking cessation. So these are the kind of things that we would want to think about. the Noble Lord Rennard and the Noble Baroness Thornton talked about these Australian pictures. They are indeed more gruesome. It just clearly shows the Australians have, I don't know, a higher threshold for what appalls them. But it is worth, well, firstly, I mean, we are very grateful to the Australian government for helping us in get through the transition by giving us these gruesome photos. But also, it is worth noting that they have a very successful smoking cessation regime. So there is a good, we are not just taking these from anybody, we're taking them from a country which is doing really well, and so there is good reason to think that they will be effective. The Noble Baroness Thornton asked about the rotation of them, and clearly we are going to need to work with the Australian government as well as design our own. In a no-deal scenario, we would need to do that so that we can have the rotation and make sure that people don't grow desensitised to them, which is of course one of the problems with these pictures. Of course, in a no-deal scenario, that we may be able to work with a number of different jurisdictions, and it may be possible to assemble a library that goes beyond more than one or two countries, but that is not something that we have a timetable for yet, I should say. In terms of I just want to say to the Noble Lord Rennard who asked, and I want to say it again explicitly, there is absolutely no going back on the progress we've made on smoking cessation. The government is a vigorous promoter of tobacco control. We know the health benefits. It's pretty much the best thing you can do if you smoke for your health is to stop smoking. So I can reassure Noble Lords that there's no going back. And then on the final matter about what these the language about fixing where possible. The point is that we are acting under the aegis of the European Withdrawal Act 2018, which gives us the power to deal with certain things. An example of what it doesn't allow us to do, because of the framework of primary legislation, is, for example, the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments found some defective drafting in its 20th report of the session 2016-17, but we don't have the power under the Withdrawal Act to fix those through this process. We would need some other process. So what we have done is use the all the powers that we have under the Withdrawal Act to make fixes, to provide continuity in the key areas, but it doesn't necessarily follow that we fixed everything through this process. It would have to be through other processes, but that's just the limit of what we can do under the primary legislation. So I hope that I've been able to answer Noble Lord's questions, to provide reassurance about our commitment to smoking cessation, and indeed our open-mindedness to future policy changes that may be required to go further and to take advantage of some of the technologies available to us, and on that basis I beg to move.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.